Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this evening. I've got a great stream with some great guests that I think you're really going to enjoy. We're going to be talking about the idea of postmodern traditionalism. A lot of people want to return to tradition, but what does tradition look like after the postmodern age? We're going to get into all of that here. I've got today with me two great guests going to reassemble the dream team from a few weeks ago. Last things, thanks for joining me, man.
It's great to be here again. We are the dream team.
That's right. And the other half of the dream team, Gio. Thanks for coming, man.
Hey, always glad to be here, Auron. It's a good feeling, to quote the Iron Sheik. So there you
go. Excellent. All right, guys. Well, we're going to jump into this in just a second. Before we do, let's go ahead and hear from our sponsor for today's show. Let me tell you about Pure Health. Hey guys, I know a lot of you are taking care of yourselves. You're working out and you're watching what you eat, and that's great because you got to start taking care of things like your liver. Why? Well, because the latest data from the American Heart Association shows that adults with fatty liver are 3.5 times more likely to have heart failure than those that avoid it. The American Liver Foundation says that over 100 million Americans already have fatty liver, which means a lot of people are at risk. There are so many things in our daily lives that can impact your liver: cholesterol, alcohol, toxins. If you're leaning on things like Tylenol or statins, it can all have an impact. That's why so many people have a sluggish, fatty liver that makes them gain weight and lose energy. Your liver has a ton of key functions, which is why you want to take care of it, and Liver Health Formula can help. It's an all-natural supplement that contains 12 clinically proven botanicals, which help to recharge and protect your liver. It's also manufactured right here in the United States and approved by American doctors. Diet and exercise are key, but if you want to add something that'll protect your liver and boost your energy, try Liver Health Formula and receive 5 free gifts when you order today. First, you'll receive a free bottle of blood sugar formula to reduce sugar cravings, and you also get 4 free ebooks to support every aspect of your health. Try Liver Health Formula by going to getliverhelp.com/Auron and claim your 5 free bonus gifts. That's getliverhelp.com/Auron. There's a link in the description down below that'll take you right to it. All right, so Gio, we hear this term postmodern all the time, right? It's the postmodern Marxists are coming for us all. We've got to watch out for the postmodernists. A lot of people are very wary of this term because of how loose it is, how much it gets thrown around. But in this context, help us understand, what are we talking about when we talk about postmodernism?
Wow, that's like right off the bat with the softballs. Or
yeah, I try to make it as easy as possible for you. Nothing controversial, nothing that's going to require serious explanation, you know.
Exactly. I mean, that was a great commercial, by the way.
Thank you. Doing my best.
Yeah, I had a point actually about like how like the right wing like has been accused recently of like lifestyle stuff, and how like that's a sign of like a fully integrated ideology that's sort of like, underneath like the lack of a political project. What do you do next? It's like it becomes like it was a very left wing thing to worry about your health back in like the 80s and 90s, but now it's like the right wing. Now it's like the Susan Sontag. What was the essay? I mean, I like Susan Sontag as a writer, but what was the essay, like beauty is fascism or whatever, But anyways, besides the point, postmodernism, like it's one of those like catch-all terms, as we all know, that's sort of, I feel like even like back in the 1990s when a lot of, how shall I say it? A lot of like popular like critique was getting like popified, right? Poptimism. There you go. Like you had like discourse poptimism. You had like TV shows mentioning it, literary theory. But in the internet age, we see like a sort of like a total glut of like academic discourse. But that's like besides the point. So the best way to describe it, like that most people consider quote unquote postmodernism, is the lack of meta narratives, the sort of the eclipsing of like one world civilizational picture that constitutes the majority view of reality. Not like reality in terms of the real, but also the way that we construct a picture of what a civilization or truth or reality or so forth, so on and so forth looks like. That's like much more of the leotard postmodern condition take. I tend to like Frederick Jameson's work. If you read postmodernism, the logic of like capitalism. Of course, he is a Marxist, and I think that there is a critique to be made in terms of like his emphasis on a lot of like his old school class dialectic Marxist type of stuff. He's much closer to some certain writers of Compact than he is about. Well, he's actually best friends with Slavoj Zizek. But Frederick Jameson, he talks about how because of the rise of print media that leads into techno capital, that leads into newer telecommunications technologies and sort of like newer forms of media, you have what he calls like the collapse of the high and low distinction in culture, right? Like that's another big facet of postmodernism. And that's the reason why I bring up like pop culture and how even the critique itself becomes like popified. That's very much like the hallmark of at least the classic like 80s and 90s, definition of postmodernism, where now it's like something that is very highbrow is mixed in with something. And of course, something very lowbrow is taken up into quote unquote high culture, and the distinction is sort of erased. So like, what will be a good example? The millennial video essayist that talks about Marvel films as if it's like Baudelaire critiquing Poussin, right? Like the paintings of Poussin. Like that's an example of how postmodernity is sort of like seeped into every facet of life. Now, the critique, of course, is like, do we really live in postmodernity? Do we live in hypermodernity? Is there like an extension of it? Like all these, in my opinion, all of these things are sort of very fluid and in together with each other. And to say like there was this point in time where we entered postmodernity as opposed to modernity, or like high modernity and low modernity, like higher or later modernity, right? Like there's not really a clear-cut distinction. There is, you could say, with modernism, where certain artistic and cultural and philosophic trends around the turn of the century basically culminated into what we know as modernism. But postmodernism is like one of those slippery things that like there was no like ground zero for postmodernism.
I was gonna ask Gio, is there any way to like
go ahead, Ross.
to put a historical moment on it? Like I don't know if you would consider sort of like the fall of the Soviet Union as sort of the last kind of global meta narrative to topple
some people, yes,
liberalism.
Yeah, I think Jameson
with the death of
so,
communism, you sort of have liberalism giving birth to postmodernity.
Yeah, well, I would say that like it's funny you mentioned the Soviet Union because a few months ago, last year before Christmas, me and my old man, because he's a boomer, right? Like he's a younger boomer, and I was showing him the newer documentary by Adam Curtis, Trauma Zone. And if you look at it, like if you look at the subtext, the fall of the Soviet Union was very much like it very much was like a postmodern descent into like a dystopian, like post-ideology society. It very much was like the weaponization of a meta-narrative collapsing. I think even like last stream we alluded to it, right? But so yeah, the Soviet Union, I think like equally as like certain international relations people, they would say that, now I'm not saying this for certain, this is debatable. I'm not saying like this is a hard like academic consensus, but I am saying that a lot of people do consider that the death of like that final meta narrative that like pulled the rug from under a sort of like not multipolar world, but sort of like a world in which ideological lines were pretty much set, right? Because the Soviet Union and the United States were incredibly ideological societies. Even the United States, I know Americans don't like to hear that, but it's true, obviously. So you could say that the death of the Soviet Union ushered in at least an awareness of the fact that we no longer live in a world constituted by massive ideologies that inform all aspects of life. Now, we do live under an ideology that basically informs all of life. We live in global liberalism, obviously. Mm-hmm. But it's tricky because liberalism proclaims to be the terminus point of ideological and cultural battles. And so that is, in a way, a weaponization of postmodernity, even though it adheres to a very strict set of like meta-narrative assumptions that it basically is now inflicting upon the rest of the world, right? And so postmodernity, again, is like one of those things that you can't like, as soon as you try to grasp on it, it's like it just pours out of your hands. But that's basically the picture. Yeah, more or less.
quick rabbit hole that has nothing to do with our topic, but now you've said something that made me interested. So Schmidt identifies this as a function of liberalism way back in,
Yeah.
whenever he's writing concept of the political. So were we already going through that process? Was the weaponization of liberalism already something that was working on the Western consciousness even well before any of these conflicts and collapses of narrative that you're talking about?
It's hard to say. I mean, you could make an argument that it was inevitable in the sense of like the given cultural, technological, especially, and other political developments that happened in the 20th century that culminated in that moment. But I mean, I know Schmidt would say that it's impossibility because by definition, you need that distinction of the other to really truly create a political, basically a cult of power, if you will, right? But that's the funny thing about global liberalism is that it really purports that there is no such thing as an outside, right? So it goes beyond Schmidt, or at least it tries to. But we know that in political theology that Schmidt writes about, like we know that's impossible, right? So that's always going to be the contradiction. It's sort of like I would almost read in like to bring Schmidt into it's a very good observation because he definitely was a modern thinker, right? He definitely saw that there still was a sort of a political project there that could be built upon. But I think that maybe there's later on Schmidt, there was some inklings there that yes, there will be a sort of order of things. And I say order of things, not just explicitly ideology, because liberalism very much is an order of things in terms of its all-consuming nature of basically all of life, right? So in Schmidt, it's very funny that he probably did see that eventually these ideological contradictions would come to heed, and that there would be a sort of sunsetting of these other alternative systems, and that eventually you would have to basically centralize all of these ideological quabbles into like one giant superstructure. Whether that's an impossibility or not, I mean, we're seeing right now that there's always going to be resistances within that order. So that's a very good question. I don't exactly know the hard answer, but I don't know. You probably have thoughts on that order. Maybe you go. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to hear yours because I think that he did see that while liberalism would try to do this, it would ultimately fail. Because I think that was kind of his whole point, is that while it purports to do this, it's really just obfuscating something that has to exist. And so it's redefining and, like you said, trying to bring everything under kind of its particularities, but it can't. And so all it can really do is hide the ball on what it's doing. But we could go down that rabbit hole forever. So we'll try to stay on topic here a little bit. So last things, you had proposed this talk because you wanted to address the idea of postmodern traditionalists. Now, obviously, this is for many people a contradiction in terms. How can you possibly look into something like traditionalism if you've already moved beyond kind of this definition of what a tradition would be, or many ways people look at postmodernism as a rejection of history and tradition. So when we talk about postmodern traditionalism, what do you have in mind, or what do you think people are proposing when they talk about postmodern traditionalism?
No problem, Auron. I'll try to take my best whack at this. But before we do that, I have a slight tangent as well. Gio, I just want to know why you're showing your old man Adam Curtis videos and not Last Things videos.
I could show him that too. No, the reason I showed him that one is because like he remembers some of that stock footage from like back in the day, like in the 70s and 80s, watching it on the news. And he's like, "Oh my god, I don't know they actually did that in the Soviet Union. They didn't tell us that."
I've been called a right-wing Adam Curtis.
Like, you have.
That'll be a blurb on my book when it comes out.
That's a good one.
But anyway, yeah. So I get that this does exist as a label, and I do know that there are people out there that really do identify and categorize themselves as postmodern traditionalists, and honestly, that might be slightly different from the phenomenon that I'm noticing and that I'm categorizing in this manner. I don't believe so, but it kind of occurred to me to write to Auron and pitch this as a conversational topic after I caught him on Benjamin Boyce speaking with Vocal Distance, and I'm not overly familiar with Vocal Distance's work, and I can't even, Auron, you might be able to do a better job of sort of summarizing what the crux of the conversation was. I wouldn't categorize it as a debate or an argument per se, but it seemed to me that Vocal was defending and advocating this somewhat amorphous idea that the West needs to return to the logos, to logocentrism, but was very, I think, unable to provide specific details about what precisely that looks like or programmatically how that is undertaken. And I think you were taking up the side of Christianity as sort of the traditional belief system of the West, Protestantism specifically within the context of the United States. And I witnessed this phenomena several other places. And I'll say that I think that it's something that appears to me to be kind of creeping into dissident spaces, although it's something that I originally kind of noticed within the IDW. And I think it concerns me a little bit that it's representing itself over in our circle, and it goes under many guises and many names. I think Jordan Peterson talks about this, and it typically goes under, when people talk about it, there tends to be a lot of kind of hyphenated terms. But when you hear someone like Jordan Peterson talking about how the West needs to return to a low fidelity ambient consensus of the good, or I was listening to an interview with Mary Harrington a while ago, and that's somebody that I really admire, but she was talking about how that we need to reassert natural law. And there have been a lot of examples where people maybe frame this in a lot of different ways, but fundamentally I think what they're talking about is returning to the function but not the form of some sort of religious and spiritual tradition. And I say all of this, my criticism, I should mention, I say all of this as a thoroughly postmodern person. I am not embedded within a tradition. I was not raised in a tradition. I suffer under my postmodern condition quite mightily. It's part of what drives me to do my videos. But I think I more often than side with, Auron, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you would be a bit of a skeptic when it comes to these projects. I hesitate to call them projects because postmodern traditionalists don't really have a lot of practical wisdom when it comes to this stuff. But I find myself a lot more sympathetic to the people that are kind of trying to reassert established traditional communities, faiths, etc. Because I don't have a lot of, I don't think that the postmodern traditionalism has ever really fully presented itself as a coherent idea, but I see people grasping for it all over the place in a lot of different conversations. And the name I tagged that with is postmodern traditionalism. I think, I know there are, I think Academic Agent may have even been one of the first people that kind of coins that phrase. He might, I don't want to put words in his mouth. He may identify as a postmodern traditionalist. But that's what I've come to observe. I don't know if you guys have been picking up on that as well in our sphere, or if you feel like it's becoming kind of a more common phenomena these days.
You want to go first, Auron? Or
I'll just put the context on the local distance conversation. Then
I knew you were going to.
Yeah. So you're right. I've done 2 of these conversations with Wokel at this point, and there's probably a third one coming up here. And the second one wasn't supposed to be on the same topic, but it ended up being on it anyway. And you're exactly right to identify, I think, the problems. The weird thing is, like, I think we're all postmodern traditionalists. If we're traditionalists at all at this point, we're all kind of stuck
Yeah.
in this moment, whether we like it or not. And so I joked with Carl Benjamin, well, now you've reached your final form as a postmodern traditionalist. I think he's got it in his bio right now. But I think all traditionalists at this point are exactly that, just due to our moment. But the specific phenomenon you're talking about, Last Things, is very real, because I think there is an attempt by many in the IDW sphere, and even some guys like Wokel, who might not count themselves in it, but are somewhere outside of it, to rescue liberalism through this kind of disembodied form of Christianity, where we can kind of take the Christian ethos and unmoor it from its tradition and use it as a binding agent to revivify liberalism. And I think that's just doomed to fail. That's what our discussion was. Our first discussion particularly was really heavily focused on, was that you have to have more moral particularity. This is what binds a culture. This is what creates culture. This is what binds a civilization, what creates a people group, and what makes a faith something that's lived in and allows people to draw meaning from it. Not some kind of disembodied notion of the metaphysic behind it. What I think a lot of these people want to do is they realize that, like, the religious function is essential now. They kind of, you still got some Sam Harris's out there, but most of the IDW types have realized, like, no, we're going to have some kind of religion, and Christianity actually turned out to be a pretty good one. But they really don't like Christianity, like pre-Enlightenment particularly, and so they really want to return to some form of, like, loose, the fumes of Christianity. They want to go back to the part where society was, like, profitably sucking the blood out of Christianity and using kind of the cultural momentum from it to kind of coast through this loose thing that would bind everyone together and would still keep some guardrails up, but without actually imposing any real limitations, any kind of real particularities onto the culture. They want to do that for a couple of reasons. One, because it keeps liberalism alive, and two, it keeps their coalition together, right? That they want the right to be a coalition of atheists and everyone else who wouldn't necessarily sign on to some kind of traditional Christianity, but doesn't like progressivism. And so their project is to kind of do this. This is why Peterson has a hard time really buying into faith, but he likes all the things that faith gave. So he's trying to find a way to take biblical truth and make it, psychological or whatever the best terminology is for that.
Oh, you done, Auron?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, I hope I didn't cut you off.
No, I just say, that's basically what they're doing. That's what their attempt is.
I was gonna say that ironically enough is very postmodern of Peterson. That's why he's been labeled as like a postmodern right winger. So let me clarify a few terms. For you asked Last Things about the term itself. It's much older than people think. Like there were people in, like, I don't know, like people in like Countercurrents in 2014 talking about it. I remember back in the day, a lot of like even NRX people that I followed, people that I wrote with in places like Thermometer Magazine, were talking about it even before us. Like, I mean, I believe even Joe Sobran wrote something that talked about explicitly about postmodernism, and not like a typical paleocon, like, condemnation way. Like, I mean, ironically enough, like, you could say paleoconservatism is like another selective critique of certain like liberal meta narratives of society. But the whole like logocentrism thing, like, again, this is like one of these things where, again, I don't want to make any enemies for you, Auron, but
no, go for it. We're here to speak the truth.
A lot of these people, like in the intellectual dark web, they take like the surface level of the word and they kind of know like the academies of it, but they're like, no, actually, it's a good term. So, Pronomi and Chomsky asks, is logocentrism the sensible center? No, it's not. Postmodern traditionalism is sensible centrism. I'll tell you why. In academia, specifically, it came from Claudius, right? Ludwig Claudius, but later was basically popularized by Jacques Derrida, the term logocentrism. Now, he calls it the metaphysics of presence, where words in terms of a logocentric worldview, which is what he thinks that the West was basically built up on, since the days of Plato, is that words have a distinct and inherent meaning, or rather they correlate and connect to a meaning that is in the presence of yourself, that is direct, that is accessible, that correlation will always equals causation, so on and so forth, right? But he's saying that words actually in his sort of textual universe model, if you will, they don't necessarily correlate to a signifier, right? So, sorry, a sign, right? Words can only be signifiers, meaning that they can only refer to themselves. Words can only refer to words, and therefore, because of the intertextual nature of language, there is no like hard and fast metaphysical correlate that connects the sign, or rather the signifier, to the sign, to the thing, to the materiality, right? Whereas that's what logocentrism means. Now, I believe that local distance in those people, what they mean is like, we need logocentrism, meaning we need like a logos in society that comes from Christianity. But the eternal logos in Christianity is different, right? So they're jumbling these academic terms. But if you were to get to be totally fair, though, Peterson and local distance and like James Lindsay, they do want to go back to a world where the word, the signified, means the signifier, right? Where the word correlates to the reality of something, the horizon of something, and the connotation that we have actually means something, right? So to their credit, that's probably what they mean. They probably, like, I know James Lindsay, like, whole class says that, like, Derrida was like a wizard of academia that was just spouting nonsense, more or less. It was sort of like free jazz, but in like, academic terminology. So when it comes to postmodern traditionalism, though, it's interesting because you have a world where a lot of the correlate towards what a word means and what is the truth, we know is complicated. This is a fact, right? You know how we know it's a fact? I'll tell you why. Okay? So I have my phone here, right? What's on my phone? A camera. People have access to recording technology and to information technology more than ever before, right? But yet we live in a world where the ambiguity of what we know to be true in terms of real events, right? There's a war going on right now. I don't know if you know this, right? I'm kidding. It's hypothetical. I'm being shown. Right?
I've heard stories. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but you heard stories, right?
Yes.
Now, do you know for a fact how many blue-yellow troops have been sunsetted and how many Russian troops have been, unfortunately, have passed, right? No, you can't put a hard figure on it, right? I mean, you maybe can guess depending on what ideological persuasion you are. If you're pro-Ukrainian, you have one number. It's like, the Ukrainians, they've only lost like 20,000 men and the Russians have lost, I don't know how many, a million, right? Or the other side, it's like, no, the Russians are like giga-chads and it's like they can, they've lost no men. Oh, they've only lost Chechens, right? They've only lost Wagner and Chechen. They haven't lost any men, right? So in other words, we have a world in which the access to information and recording technology and live streaming of events is more powerful than ever. Like you can hook up to Starlink and a soldier can put a GoPro cam. I've seen this. Go to Telegram and you'll see this, right? Not that I would encourage people to do so. It's terrible.
But theoretically, you could do that. Yeah.
Theoretically, right? It's barbaric and terrible. The point being is that we can't agree upon what we see in front of our lying eyes. And this is what the postmodernists are saying. That in terms of listen, throw out all these pop culture terms that the media has been using since the age of Trump, which is post-truth or truthiness or okay, there's something to that, but ignore what the media has fabulized in terms of the post-truth era. We've always lived, not that we've always lived in post-truth, but post-truth has been with us for a long time. Put it that way, okay? Don't have any illusions about these things. The point being is that there's always going to be an ambiguity in terms of what a word or what a narrative or what a phrase or what an ideology purports to be the real in front of us and what we actually know to be real. There's always going to be the ambiguity. And as we increase our ability in terms of the sort of techno communication apparatus we live under, as our ability to record and track and view reality increases, it seems like our ambiguity in terms of what we know to be true has gone even deeper. That doesn't make any sense. If we lived in the world that James Lindsay or Jordan Peterson wanted, then I don't know, I guess like 1990, like 2000s, I don't know, like, well, we would still be debating creationism, and they'd still be like BTFOing the, Venom Fang X or whoever. Like, we would still live in a world in which like civilization more or less agrees upon everything, and like the world will go in a certain direction, and people will more or less agree in like what is prudent or pragmatic. Like, that doesn't hold anymore. We know this doesn't hold anymore. I mean, listen, I'm just ranting right now, but the point I'm trying to make is that postmodernity, you can't think of it as like, this is an ideology that a group of people scheme together to inflict upon us. Postmodernity is not like, it's not an ideological position per se. It's rather a critique, and it's a way of viewing the world, and it's a way of viewing a particular moment that we're living through, rather than like, I don't know, like Jacques Derrida and like the Berkeley staff in the 60s got together and like, oh, we're going to like tell people that the reals aren't reals anymore. Feels, feelings over facts. We're going to tell people feelings over facts now. And it's like, everyone's going to be like, their brains are going to like turn to mush, and we're, I don't know, or something, right? Like, it's not, this is the problem I feel with a lot of right-wing discourse that has, not right-wing discourse, I mean like normie level conservative discourse, that a lot of people on the outer edges of the right wing have critiqued and said, well, actually, the reason we kind of look foolish, and, granted, our enemies are equally foolish for their own assumptions, right? Obviously. But the reason we kind of look foolish is because we think that there's an intentionality to like, okay, is there an intentionality to a lot of things that we live through? Yes, obviously, like no word of doubt, it's true. But in terms of like something as all consuming as a postmodern condition, it's not necessarily something that you can like go together in a smoky room and like inflict upon like the world, more or less. It's something that has culminated through the development of a particular mode of thinking and a particular form of technology, and the way in which we've gone as a civilization as a whole. That's what real postmodernity is. It's not like when all these intellectual dark web people, it's almost as if the way they're talking about it, it's if something like, if we just give people the right information, then all of a sudden, like, I don't know, we'll go back to high modernism or something like that. Like, it's, I don't know, it's like the way they frame the discussion is kind of infuriating in a sense, because it's not something that like has that hard and fast intentionality to it. But I know we're getting like, yeah, go ahead. Last things. I'm
well, so I think something that I noticed that I think can kind of fairly define the position, regardless of who's talking and what name it's going under, is this: it's sort of putting literary criticism before literature, or putting the critique of the narrative before the narrative itself. I think in some ways it's like we don't need the Bible, we just need Jordan Peterson's videos about the Bible, because
exactly. That's very postmodern, right? That's that's taking away the textual nature of something for the intertextual nature of something. So exactly. It's like you can have the video essay instead of the actual book, right? So, sorry, I cut you off, Leslie.
No, and I mean, I can roll my eyes on that at the same time as I think it's actually in fact very challenging to simply, for us postmoderns to just kind of read the Bible or take in the Bible without taking in ourselves, taking in the Bible. I mean, I'm somebody who's been kind of experimenting with Catholicism lately. I've been doing the rosary most every day, trying to break my way into some level of non-postmodern authenticity here. But I observe myself observing myself when I'm doing the rosary. It's more easily said than done, but it does seem like this. Once you once the meta narratives have kind of crumbled, it's hard to, put the baby back in the bathwater, so to speak. It's hard to regain a certain kind of innocence or sincerity in your approach to things like that. I think one of the main
viewing yourself, that's a perfect, like, that describes it. You're viewing yourself, trying to get at that source of authenticity, whereas in previous generations it just came, like, not that it just came to you, but there was a very specific set of like cultural and like civilizational assumptions that brought you to that moment, rather than you having to like re-engineer it, and then also having that sort of like that postmodern irony, like, I'm watching myself doing this. That's a great term for it. Yeah, sorry to cut you off.
It's interesting, Gio. I'm curious to get your take on this. I've heard academic agent discuss this a number of times, so I'm not bringing anything up that I wouldn't feel fine talking about or talk about with him. But I know he's mentioned on a few streams that he's been bringing his daughter to a lot of I think Anglican services. Like he's been going to Sunday, even though he's kind of expressed that he's not really a believer. I don't think he'd call himself an atheist, just because atheism comes with a lot of specific political baggage at this day and age, but maybe technically he is that. But I think he still sort of feels compelled to give his daughter the experience of this ritual and have it be an element of her childhood, so that it kind of, she might have a certain nostalgia for it, or at least remembrance of it. Even if he's sort of in some sense engaging in it cynically, or at least not participating in a sort of naive pre-modern faith tradition. And I'm not judging him for it. I suspect that, because I've considered doing the exact same type of thing with my kids, quite honestly. If there's a way that I could be confident that I could kind of re-mystify or re-enchant the world for my kids, or set up the next generation to have some form of subjectivity that is not this, hyper, this postmodern subjectivity, I do it. But what I suspect would happen in that scenario is kids kind of catch on to these things more quickly than a lot of adults realize. And I think sooner or later, AA's daughter is going to kind of say, like, Daddy, you behave kind of differently from a lot of the other people in the congregation. Or, do you, like, how do you really feel about this claim to truth in the Bible? So I'm curious, Gio, what I was going to ask you is just, do you find that, what would you think about academic agents' tactic in that scenario? Or it's really something that I've considered, even though I don't think I'm in a place quite yet where I can sort of, I haven't been baptized, I couldn't accept communion, but I'm tempted to sort of baptize my kids, even if it's something that I can't fully commit to quite yet.
Well, it's a good thing. I mean, I feel like any faith, like any foundation of it, can be, can be approached, even if it's not like totally sincere. I think like a lot of people that generally do like struggle with these, like, it's much different than someone like, I don't know, like, again, I don't want to bash him too much, but like Peterson or like Elaine de Botton saying like, well, we have to get like the useful parts of religion. If you generally try to make a go of it, I think that's different. But it's sort of like one of those things, like, speaking of postmodernism, it's sort of like one of those things that that Mark Fisher talked about. And I believe he got this from Frederick Jameson as well. When he talked about the like cultural exhaustion, and like it was part of his essay that became a lecture right before he passed, unfortunately. It was called like the slow cancellation of the future. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, and I think you've heard of that, right? Yeah. Like, he's like, well, it's like in music, right? Like, anything can come back now. It's like now Lana Del Rey can like sell an album where it's kind of like 50s exotica music, or like some like SoundCloud rapper can take a sample from like Entheo Jazz or whatever, and like, you know, can make some, in other words, like you're always haunted by the past because there's this incredible eclecticism going around. And this is what Jameson said as well in the Postmodernism, the book, you know, Logic of Late Capitalism, is that eventually the reason culture goes towards exhaustion is because at the same time you have this glut of like everything of every epoch, meaning like the dead no longer bury the dead. Now it's like ever presently, like that's what hauntology is.
Yeah,
It's
I was gonna say you're
Yeah.
describing hauntology as well.
Yeah,
I mean-
and as that happens, like the future sort of like becomes an eternal present, right? Now the reactionary, and Jameson, he actually did have in his book, he wrote this back in the 80s. He said, like, I'll let you finish the last point, but really quickly, he said that, you know, actually a lot of these reactionary people, they could also like come and say like, well, actually now that there's no consensus on truth, we might as well literally treat society as if it is like an aesthetic project. And we kind of know that there was that certain regime, certain painter of Austrians in the 20th century in Germany that tried to treat all of life as a work of art, right? So I think like the reason a lot of liberals are so threatened by postmodernity is because it's like the people on the left and like Jordan Peterson, they hate each other, but they're both like, you know what? Postmodernism, that can lead to the Austrian landscape painter. And even in the left now, you're starting to see like a lot of like new sincerity. Like this is another thing too, is like the left, they're not even postmodern themselves. They have an incredible and nuanced level of belief in things to almost a metaphysical level. It's just that they tend to like weaponize relativism. It's like selective nihilism. It's like they'll do a little bit of it here and there just to demoralize the chuds, but actually they still have like a very solid grasp of what belief is on a very high level, on a very deep level, the current political level. But sorry, last thing, I cut you off, so go ahead.
Oh well, you know, I realized as I was speaking, Gio, you know, I set up this elaborate, you know, moral scenario with baptizing my children or academic agents, but yeah, I mean, you yourself, I think, are maybe the best kind of subject for this, because I know that you are a devout Catholic, and yet you are simultaneously a you know, a lion of postmodern theory, or you know, this is your
lion of postmodern.
Yeah,
it's my wheelhouse.
You know,
you should 100% put that on the back of your book, Gio.
I will. Yes, when it comes out next year.
This is your
blurb from Last Things, a lion of postmodern theory.
Oh, well, but like you
no,
both,
it's a good one.
You
can
just both
enjoying it.
Very good. Yeah.
You can both imagine how I imagine that creates a fair amount of I don't know, tension, cognitive dissonance, struggle, but you are somebody that has maintained an identity as a Catholic, despite having read every, you know, every writer born after 1945.
Yeah. Is there a question there? Last things.
I mean, I guess. I can try to frame it as a question. Has that how have you weathered the postmodern critique and maintained your religious identity? Because I mean, I guess sorry, this should be the question. I should begin by asking, do you consider yourself to be a postmodern traditionalist in any sense of that phrase?
Well, traditionalist is a very funny term. It's a term that's come under a lot of heat recently, but more or less, I mean, postmodern right would be like a broad catch-all that I think is very apt. But the reason I square that circle is because I feel like postmodernity is not relativism. It's a critique of a certain epoch. It's not saying that there's no truth. It's just saying that how as truth as it's experiential is perspectival. Mm-hmm. So recently, there was a great article, and he's a fiction writer. It was one of his first nonfiction works, essays. My good friend, Please Call Me Christ. That's his actual name. It's PMC Christ on Twitter. And he wrote this book. He wrote this essay called Cthulhu Swims Right, where he talks about this specifically. He talks about how, as the right wing or the contemporary right or the E-right, as it realizes itself as more of how should we call it? An aesthetic avant-garde, if you will, meaning that the sort of like coherent political project is something very complicated, something that is like, even just to think of terms as a political movement. Even like back in 2017, there were like writers that said like, well, the whole like mass political movement thing is kind of like a construct that isn't viable for like whatever reason at this particular moment. So instead, what have the frogs done? They've waged, I don't know, can I say the word insurgency on YouTube?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. They've waged a cultural insurgency. That's what the frogs have done, right? And so I highly encourage people to read that article. It's called Cthulhu Swims Right, where he talks about this. He talks about the development of the fact that if we do live in a postmodern condition, then the possibilities of tradition itself can come in through the back door, because now the field is open to embrace truth that is not like beholden to particular claims of how shall I say it? Like, not beholden to like particular claims of like not warranted true belief, but rather like hard and fast distinctions that are agreed upon. And so like the medics that we've seen since like even before 2016, right? Like I know it's like a meme now, right? There was this video going around. You know that song, it won't be the same when we meet again. And it was like all the people from Gamergate in 2016, and our good friend Carl Benjamin was like front and center. And so I know it's a meme, right? That like basically Gamergate brought us all here, right? But it's true. It's true, because whether he knew it or not at the time, but I suspect he knows it now, because as we know, the Saint of Swindon, Carl Benjamin, has gone through a political renaissance. But at the time, Sargon of Akkad unleashed a postmodern force of reaction through meme culture and mimetic warfare, the likes of which we've never seen before. And I know, like, I realize how, how that sounds. Like, I realize, like, people, like, that are watching this may tell me to touch grass or whatever. But when you truly think of it, though, the way that the right wing had developed up until that point, like through like the normal like culture war of the 1980s, which was largely informed by like politics and the way that the moral majority in America had like a hold over political life to extent till like that was erased in the 1990s. When you look at the resurgence of like a relevance of a right-wing cultural moment, right? Like the trolls, the frogs, the chuds, right? That was really significant, because it took the recognition that we live in a perspectival age where there is no claim to an overarching meta-narrative of truth that we all must conform to, and said, you know what? Actually, maybe it's all right to entertain certain forms of mysticism. Maybe it's all right to, because at the end of the day, when you actually look at the development of the right wing, or what even, I know like even Moldbug talks about this, where it's debatable, but we can more or less agree that like it's from, Joseph de Maistre, French Revolution, post-French Revolution. There always was kind of an element of both romanticism and anti-romanticism in like rightist thinking, right? So in actuality, that romanticism, that sort of even irrationalism that came about within the past 10, 15 years, especially on the internet, that was primed and ready to go. So the picture that like the dark web people have, where no, actually we're fighting for like the meta, like the grand narratives and the left are relativists, that all gets thrown out the window in 2016. All of it. Even before that. No longer is there a side of like, we are capital T truth and their relativism. it's almost like we're just fighting, like there's different wars of religiosity. It's like we're living in the 100 Years' War, but it's like, in an instant on the internet, right? Like, so, but that's very much a postmodern concept of, now in the absence of collective reason and meta narrative comes faith, comes a counter enlightenment, right? And so the left has their own religions. The right, like Sargon of Akkad basically created the religion of mimetic warfare in the right way. So I gotta stop. That's too much. That's too much. Let's
No,
yeah,
it does make actually quite a bit of sense. Remind me when we're done, and I'll have to tell you a funny story related to that. But to put a little skin on that, to make that a little more concrete, and to answer your questions, last things. So I didn't come from a background of no faith. I came from a family that was very religious, and I was in the church very young. But I did grow up in a very postmodern situation, obviously, like we all did. And I was in a situation like so many, where you had like, the atheists, and versus the apologists, and the Four Horsemen, William Lane Craig debating, debating
Ken Hovind versus Hitchens,
Christopher Hitchens or something, right?
Yeah.
And so I read like all these books, and I tried to justify my faith logically, and I tried to understand all these things, and I was a real believer. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't, but there was always this, I have to have some academic backing for my faith. I have to have this thing, and the reason was I had never really had to survive it with it, and only it. And then I lost my first wife, and it was the only way to survive. The academics didn't matter anymore. All of the arguments and all of the apologetics, it all falls away, because the truth is, this is real, and this is necessary to my continuance as a human being. And that's when religion really became true. Like, I had always been a believer, but that's when it became true. And I think it's important to have that. I think you should bring up your children, and I think you should expose them to that. I think you should go through those things, if only because they at some point might need it. They might rely on it. It might be the only thing, that can get you through it. I think that shakes you completely out of your postmodern condition, when this is the only thing that can kind of bind your reality together. And C.S. Lewis, to butcher one of his quotes, said something like I don't actually love my fellow man, but God commands me to love my fellow man, and then I act like I love my fellow man, and sure enough, over enough time, I find that I actually love him. It's the doing, it's the embodiment of the action that eventually brings about the completion. You might be faking it the whole time, but by living it, eventually it becomes part of you, becomes part of your lived reality, and then it's true, because it's become true through action and through lived experience. And so even if you feel like a fake, even if you feel like a phony at first, I think it's really essential to put yourself in a position where you can believe, even if you don't right now, because one day it will be really essential, and it'll be there for you when you need it.
Thank you, Auron. That's all really well said. And I will say, even the act of kind of faking it till you make it is still sort of, I think a more of a true engagement than this kind of constantly observing of oneself. It's at least you're you're playing a sport, you're kicking the ball, you're moving forward, as opposed to just kind of observing yourself, even if you don't really feel quite yet like you know how to play the sport. So I think that's all very, very well said, and I appreciate it. One other thing I wanted to talk about, I just some of the reasons why I'm such a skeptic, or I kind of roll my eyes around a lot of these more postmodern traditionalist projects or talking points. And Auron, I think you said all of this a lot more politely than I did in your conversation with Local Distance. But I mean, if I could kind of boil it down and be much more grug brained about it, I think that the questions that one needs to ask for any kind of, I don't know, traditionalist spiritual project is, one, can it be taught to a dumb person? Can this be grokked by somebody who's like just a 100 IQ normie? Two, can it be adopted by just kind of an unreflective person? Somebody who's not particularly interested in, who's not going to pick up C.S. Lewis, who's not going to read, who's not going to watch the Jordan Peterson videos. Just somebody that's either because if that's their nature or they're too busy in their daily life. And the third is just, can it be taught to a child? And I think that's what makes me honestly lose my patience with a lot of these postmodern traditionalist projects as quickly as I do, because I mean my son is now 5, and I can tell you about he is not a literary critic. He's very charming and smart, but what he does love is narratives, and it's very interesting because I can see him, he's obsessed, and it's something that makes me feel kind of guilty for not getting him involved and invested in a faith tradition at this point, because Lego Ninjago has become his religion, and he can talk about all the different ninjas the way that somebody could talk about the apostles, like. But and I'm being kind of glib here, but at the same time I'm really not. I think that the one of the great failures of postmodern traditionalism is that it's only available to a certain kind. It's only available to a certain IQ. It's only available to a certain disposition, and it's only available to a certain, after a certain age, in a certain kind of
Well,
go right ahead, Gio. Sorry.
No, go ahead. You finish your thought.
Well, just a certain level of of the kind of subjectivity that we've been talking about here tonight. A certain amount of like self-consciousness.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, you have to be aware of the fact that you're living in something to like embrace an antecedent of it, but not really, because okay, so I realized I didn't answer the question, but Auron, you brought it like really to the foreground, where you said it became a matter of survival, right? And so I think of like faith similarly, in that it's not that the truth of a faith disappears, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just that what postmodernity refers to as a particular set of a particular condition in which the sort of modernist reliance on a very particular form of reason that has guided the West since like the post-Enlightenment is being called into question, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I find it kind of funny how people say that postmodernism puts faith into doubt, when really there were a lot of like artistic and literary movements and even philosophic movements that would be considered postmodernism, that in a way allows for a form of anti-modernity by embracing this critique of reason. So that reason also brought faith in the West into doubt. So when Jordan Peterson said, or like, whoever, right? Like just Harris, oh God, I don't want to mention Sam Harris, but like,
yeah,
when they talk about how postmodernism or like whatever, postmodern Marxism, blah, 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 undermines a faith in reason, that same reason also was, if you follow like the critique of people, also undermined faith in like a collectively held belief, right? Like the sort of instrumental reason that came from the Enlightenment that informed like even the managerial, like the liberal managerialism that we're living under right now, is very much like a product of that same reason. So the way I would say, like the way I would frame it is like postmodern traditionalism is the full recognition of that critique of reason, right? And from there, you can say that even though faith particularly Christianity, no longer has a significant, like the same significance in terms of it being that which instantiates the picture of reality to the Western world. That truth is still there. It's rather the truth of the world that postmodernity is dealing with.
Mhm.
It's not, so I think like that's the way at least I think of it. If anything, it gives me more room for faith. Like that's even what Kant said, right? In the absence of reason, there's room for faith, right? I mean, you meant it something differently, but like, yeah,
No,
go ahead, Auron. I know you want to see. Go ahead.
Yeah,
You know
no, I think that's perfect. I think that's exactly what it is, because it's funny. So many religious people, because these rationalists are currently opposing wokeness, have been convinced that postmodernism is an attack on religion, or is something that religious people need to be worried about. Funny enough, it's actually just something that rationalists need to be worried about. And the reason they're freaking out is that it might create space for many things, including the return of mysticism or religion, like you're talking about. And so instead of being something that the religious person needs to fear, they might need to understand that the people who are most scared of postmodern thinking are those that are worried about their god of reason being displaced more than they are about, the it tearing apart the American tradition or the Christian tradition or something like that.
100%. Yeah.
But sorry, I didn't mean to, I just wanted to I think that
No,
that's
a great
really
point.
critical point for you,
That
for
is a
what you're talking about there. And
Yeah.
I think it's really
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, no, because no, what you said is like really spot on, that the rationalists have something to worry about, because like if anything, even like the entertainment of like an anti-modernist thinking within postmodernism. I mean, even in the work of art, like this is how you get like even in modernism proper, you have people like Gauguin, right? Very like going back to something that, at least in his mind, was very ancient within the human experience in through the work of art. So even within modernism, you have like the seeds of a critique of modernism. You have to realize like postmodernism comes about through the exhaustion of that like Western tradition, right? So secular instrumental reason can only deliver you to like, it can only give you so much before it just strips the human condition of like anything that really matters, right? And so postmodernism is just a recognition of that. But to lead to your point, Auron, let me give you a funny little anecdote. This is something that Jordan Peterson would find crazy. Okay, so Jacques Derrida, I believe in the early 2000s, before he died, one of his students asked him about I believe he asked him about Christopher Hitchens, if I recall. He asked him about the new atheists, right? And they go, well, in France, they have a very crazy like academic tradition where most of them are like atheists, but they're not like North American atheists. They're not like Anglo atheists. They're like, I don't believe in God, but I hate God because I hate the Catholic Church. So it's very much like the dramatic like poetic rejection. It's like a Nietzschean atheism in some ways, right? But Derrida is like of that romantic atheist tradition. And a student said, well, what about God? Like you say that there's no meta narrative, you say that there's no logocentrism. What about Christianity? And of course, in academia in France, there's a huge amount of trad casts, ironically enough, as well. Because France is like the society of contradictions. So Derrida says, when he talks about deconstruction, right? He goes, can you not deconstruct atheism and that lack of belief and that assurity of reason that delivers you to conclude that the world is made from nothing, like Lawrence Krauss nonsense, right? Lawrence Krauss was also on the flight logs along with Steven Pinker, by the way. So, yeah. So,
in case you want to know where rationality leads you.
Yeah,
right
exactly.
to a particular item.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. All of a sudden, I know nothing about Hillary Clinton. I have no documents that would lead to her arrest. I want to clarify that I am in the great place. I have everything to live for. Sorry.
No, wonder where all the research money came from about genetics and all that. But no, but anyways, so like, Lawrence Krauss has that book. By the way, that book's like terribly flawed. Even other atheists say that it's...
Oh, it's really bad. It's comically bad.
Yeah, comically bad. So Derrida said, it's so crazy. Derrida, the king of postmodernism, apart from like, Baudrillard and all that, he says, well, actually, maybe it's kind of true. You can really deconstruct your way into thinking that, I don't know, maybe Christianity has a thing or two right. So Derrida's like, well, actually, maybe you could potentially deconstruct your way towards God again, right? Because you can critique that the sort of dialectic of like atheism being a rational choice, quote unquote, because of the predicate of like, this is the way that human evolution and like development of reason and so forth. That Derrida, the king of postmodernism, said himself, like, actually, you can also deconstruct the other way. You could say that, well, actually, atheism is itself like a meta-narrative that can be critiqued just as much as anything else. So there you go.
It reminds me of the Mo bartender meme where the comes back in at the end. He throws the guy out of the bar and the guy comes back in, but it's religion and rationalists.
Or like when Mo like redid his bar with that designer woman, he's like, it's Pomo. They're like, what? Weird for the sake of weird. I do a good Mo Sislak, man. That's crazy.
Have either of you? This was something else I wanted to bring up on this stream. Have either of you been reading or keeping up with Zero HP's recent essays on? I think he's titled them "Towards a Christo-Nietzschean Synthesis."
Oh yeah,
and the first one is him laying out sort of this structure of I guess religious thought. And I did not bring this up as an example of postmodern traditionalism, and I had Zero HP on my channel. I talked to him about this. I don't think that's his project. I don't think that's his intention at all. I don't think he's presenting this, and I would not group it under one of these postmodern traditionalist examples. But I do think it's interesting to bring it up in the context of this conversation. And as you guys remember, but for the sake of our audience, he sort of goes through this kind of taxonomy of religious thought, and presents these different kind of categories that present themselves in religious thought. And this is religion termed very broadly. You could fit Marxists under this. You could fit, progressive woke theology under this, as well as Christianity. And he uses primarily Greek terms. So there's gnosis, right, which is the secret knowledge. The believer or the person within this specific religion has secret insight into the nature of the world, whether that's the capitalist exploitation if you're a Marxist, or the revelation of Christ if you're a Christian. And then there's the nemesis. The nemesis is the kind of eternal, unvanquishable enemy that blinds the majority of the world to the gnosis. Everybody that's outside of your faith is a victim of the nemesis. And there are I think those are the kind of two major categories. There are other ones like taboo and ecstasy. And one thing I brought up with him in conversation privately was I felt like the one category that he had omitted was the category of the epiphany, right? Another Greek term, which is the epiphany is the
it's revealing, isn't it?
Essentially the revelation. So you could like Christ is the epiphany, and I would say that. But in the same context, in the using the kind of taxonomy that Zero HP is using, Karl Marx is an epiphany. He's an epiphany for that religious, meme of
there's Marxism. A messianism there as well. Like Benjamin talks about that.
Yeah. And I joked with Zero because this is. I don't think he's concluded this series of essays, and that they're brilliant and they're very well executed, and I'm looking forward to what he comes up with. But I kind of joked with him, like, even if you have the most persuasive argument on the planet for this Christo-Nietzschean synthesis, we're probably going to have to crucify you before anybody buys it. You're going to have to be martyred, or there's going to have to be some, messianic figure that embodies this Christo-Nietzschean synthesis, and they're going to have to probably die in a very televised manner, because that is something that I think is necessary to codify these systems, is the epiphany, that person which exemplifies and personifies all of the key insights of that religious system. And I bring this up in this context because I wonder, is part of why we are all trapped within the postmodern and what the best we can hope for is a kind of postmodern traditionalism, because we're kind of denied that epiphany, and I think a lot of talk surrounding kind of Caesarism is in some ways a longing for the epiphanic, or I think we're going to be, I think the one thing that I can conceive of that would kind of break the world out of the kind of the postmodern condition, or create the opportunity for a more kind of sincere traditionalism, is that figure of the epiphany. So I just put that out there. I thought in leading up to this talk, I was thinking a lot about Zero's work in regards to those religious categories.
Well, that's great. That's amazing, because Frederick Jameson talks about postmodernism being that a lot, like most historical movements, cultural artifacts, religiosities, even all of them become a series of stylizations. Like they become kitschified in a way, right? They become, and I think even like talked about like the sort of like big mega church stadium, like Christianity as being like a part of that sort of spectacle, right? Like this very much is like the society of spectacle stuff. And I know ZHP in one of his threads, he talks about this, where he says that to really truly break out of it, you would need like the mix of a Caesar and a Christ and an Odin and a Nietzsche. You would need truly like a transformative world picture embodiment in a human being to transform the stylization of religion into something that is like a truly living faith, right? Because I feel like
so we need the second coming.
You need the second coming, yeah, because you would feel that like even like within religious, like even trad circles, I hate to say this, like again, I don't really like I know like I'm aware of the fact that as a cradle Catholic, it's like me like lording it over, whatever. But I do notice that there is like among like traditionalist circles on the internet specifically, it still is at the level of stylization, in that the way that it's practiced, like, okay, why am I a trad cath? Why am I a trad ortho? Why am I an Odinist? Why am I a Nietzschean? Oh, because I want to own the libs, right? Like that is still a stylization of faith that can have a building block towards sincerity. So I wouldn't want to like cast aspersions on anybody, but I do feel that we're still living within, and that really is, I think, the essence of postmodern traditionalism. No, well, not the essence of it. That's kind of like a strange word, right? When I talk about postmodernism, but it's sort of like a definition of that. You embrace that faith will still be there, but it will have to exist in terms of its worldly picture, not its metaphysical picture, its worldly picture as a form of stylization among others, right? Because like in the sort of like 2010s culture war, that's why I brought it up before, is because that really like highlighted the fact that we're in this like 100-year religious war, where people are fighting over their own stylizations, and like the past can always come back, or trends can always come back. Like it can be like, I don't know. I mean, I'm a millennial, so I want to live in like Y2K aesthetic early 2000s world forever. That would be amazing. But I know we're not going to, unfortunately, because something happened when those towers fell that basically like, I don't know, no-clipped us into a different world than the world that us millennials were promised by our boomer parents. So yeah, so if millennials are sort of like the cynical, frustrated, like postmodern driftwood generation, that's for a reason, and I hope like the conversation
postmodern driftwood generation.
Yeah, exactly. No, but I hope like the lesson we learn is that all of these things happen for a reason. Mm-hmm. Right? Like they happen because of a course of development. But in that course of development, that's the funny thing about postmodernism, is that there's no determinism in it, right? There's no determinism. So the world that we were given by like the Twin Towers falling, and the surge and the financial crisis and then who knows, eventually Gamergate, right? I mean, everything leads back to Gamergate. But the the world that we were given, when you think of it almost as like a time loop or a time warp that we've entered into, but there isn't a contingency. Like, there isn't a necessity, but it's contingency that we could have. And this is what Mark Fisher was talking about as well, right? Postmodernism is the recognition of that we could have lived in another time, right? And maybe there could be another possibility in another direction. And we see this nowadays. I mean, the internet age has proven this to us, that there is always a contingency to things, that there could be another path that we can all walk down, and that there actually is, like, the whole, like, liberal Whig history, the whole, like, universal state that Kojev talks about, right? Like, that is even equally called into question, because that is another possibility among others. It's a strong one, right? I mean, a lot of the people that we interact with every day, and like a lot of the things we tweet about, a lot of things we write about and talk about in podcasts when it comes to like liberalism, we have to recognize that it's brittle in one sense. And we all talk about how it spiritually decimates people and it deracinates people and it strips them of their faith and their heritage and so forth. But at the same time, there is a lasting power to its assumptions, right? Now, if I were to even be charitable to Moldbug, I know I'm very uncharitable to Moldbug, but if I were to be charitable to him, he is correct in that it is culminated into a series of assumptions about human nature and about politics that more or less have some sort of staying power, right? Like, I know that's like an old reactionary talking point, but it's true. And that's something that we have to deal with and something we have to recognize. The only way to like truly critique something is if you realize its power, right? And liberalism, there's signs of its weakness. Like, I don't want a black pill, but it still is a all-consuming and powerful force, right? But postmodernity says that that is one among many, and there could be another thing. There could be a post-liberalism, not like, the cringy like Harvard Patrick Deneen,
not the post-liberal order.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not the integralist post-liberalism, but like genuine illiberal or post-liberal thinking could come down the pipeline, right? Like that's the space of possibility. You know who is the real postmodern thinker? I know he'd like, maybe he'd unfollow me if he heard me here saying this, but Nick Land, right? What is the outside? What is the force? Like, you want to talk about postmodernism? What is the force from the outside coming into the present, manifesting itself through the present into the future, right? Like, that itself is another recognition of our timeline, of our reality being spliced open by all these other forces that we can't account for, right? Because usually, like, the like reason post-enlightenment liberal picture of reality is that there is no outside, that eventually we're just going to evolve, and like, I don't know, the Ayatollah in Iran's going to topple. There's going to be regime change in Russia and China and North Korea. China will be liberal too. They'll have whatever, right? Like they'll have
build the United Federation of Planets. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
No, but Star Trek was incredibly, like, if you want to talk about global liberalism, like, that's why you should study Star Trek, as you know, Auron. Like, have you done a stream on Star Trek?
I have not, but I'll put one together. We should definitely do that.
Yeah.
But I think we should go ahead and also turn our attention to our super chats as they are building up here.
Wow, we got a lot of them.
Yeah, we've got quite a few coming up here. So let's go ahead and grab the questions of the people real quick here. Let's see. Matty Ice here for $10. Thank you very much, sir. Postmodernism is not real in practice. No one lives it. The rejection of meta-narratives is applauded by people who replace Christ's American Revolution with Gloria Steinem, slavery, and the big H. What do you think about that, gentlemen? There is no postmodernism. It's just a replacement of meta-narratives.
Last things you want to go there?
I'm still mulling it over in my head. I'm still swishing it around like some fine.
Yeah, it's a term that like has many meanings for many different people. So,
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we do live in a form of hypermodernity, definitely. People don't live as if they're postmodern. Yeah, that is a good critique, but I still would say that, like, if you don't believe in postmodernism maybe no, I'm not going to make that. But man, it's true. Postmodernism believes in you.
Yeah.
No, I think that, yeah, it's true in that, specifically when it comes to the political left, they don't act as if they're postmodern whatsoever. They have a very, like, Gloria Steinem was a CIA operative, so she had a very specific set of beliefs that she was trying to instrumentalize and weaponize. You knew that, right, gentlemen? You knew that she was being paid by the CIA. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the first time I've heard about Steinem, but
you never heard of Gloria Steinem?
A lot of the feminists were bankrolled, so.
Oh yeah, she was not all feminism, but I mean, she was the pop feminist that was receiving the glow in the dark, the checks glue, had the glow in the dark ink on him. So.
She had enough sex appeal to kind of get the.
Yeah, she wasn't Dworkin, Like,
I was about to say, I don't think Dworkin was on the payroll.
No,
Let's
I
see,
like
Maddie,
Gary. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Matty Ice here again for $5. AA mentioned once they replace a story of birth with a story of death. We'd be better to highlight this more, in my opinion. So just continuing off of his first super chat there. I mean, I think there is truth in what you're saying, Matty Ice. There is, it's like people who are hardcore determinists until they then tell you to stop doing whatever you're doing that they don't like. No one actually acts as if people are not responsible for their decisions, even if their worldview dictates 100% that they are. But I think there is also, as Gio has pointed out, I think pretty adeptly, a real collapse of the meta narrative that is a part of kind of our world today. So I think you're right that no one truly acts as if there's nothing. Of course, to be fair, I don't think most people, if you walked around and like bumped into the average progressive, I don't think the first thing they'd say is like, I'm a postmodernist. Like, I don't think they describe themselves like that at all. So to be fair to the left, I don't think most leftists walk around announcing I am a dedicated postmodernist. So I don't know how much of a critique that would be of their own self-description, so much as it is a critique of those who apply it too liberally to those on the left.
I think like that's another point would be, a lot of people in the political right, they don't realize that the left truly believes in this. Like they don't a lot of like the argument that postmodernism, I don't know, led to like drag time story hour or whatever. Like you can make a case obviously for that, but it's more of like, it's not that they're like, oh, well, actually, now that we know that there's no such thing as like a commonly held reality, now I can become like, I can change. I can basically create my life as a work of art and become like, I mean, there's certainly academics that think this way, but the average like run of the mill, like affluent liberal woman that like takes her kid to a drag show, they're not thinking of it that way. They actually genuinely believe that, no, right, if you state that your identity is as such, it is as such. It's an iron law. So it's not like, oh, there's an ambiguity about identity. They're like, no, if so I feel like that's unfortunately a lot of like people on the right wing or on like, normie conservatives, they tend to think of everything being like, this is relativism. It's not really relativism in the sense that they don't think of things as being relativistic. They think they genuinely believe that Mulvaney person is like, I've only been a woman for 6 months. It's like she's only been a woman for 6 months.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's true. Yeah. It's one of those kind of asymmetrical warfare issues that I think Moldbug articulates a lot. That postmodernity hamstrings the right a lot more than it does the left. Like, what's that quote from, speaking of the Second Coming, Yeats? Like, the good do nothing, and
the best lack all conviction.
The best lack all conviction, because I do think that a lot, especially like, I don't know, very like, neurotic, smart, right, dissidents probably do tie themselves in knots thinking about issues of moral relativism.
Yeah.
And that's not something that causes a single skip in the step of the mother on their way to drag queen story hour, or the drag queen for that matter.
Yeah, it's not like they wake up in the morning and they're like, oh, there's no truth anymore. Ergo, I'm going to be a different gender.
Right.
Like, it doesn't work that way.
I think it's really important for a lot of people who were very invested in the idea of cold rationality defining the world to believe that there was some kind of convoluted ideological mechanism that moved people towards what they see as something that's wholly irrational, rather than realizing that evil exists in the world and people are capable of holding evil beliefs.
Yeah.
I think it's.
There you go.
It really is. It's a very simple. It's one of those things where if you spend, many years and write enough doctoral dissertations, you can talk yourself out of the obvious, which is that something really nasty has taken hold of your civilization, and most people around you no longer believe in truth because of it. So,
don't make me tap the sign. They actually do want to love with kids. Like,
sometimes it's not rocket science. It's all the really complicated explanations of the world are sometimes far less illuminating than
what an egregore you've unleashed upon the world. Or
I'm sorry, I dream of a world where the sign never needs to be tapped again. That's
beautiful.
Creeper Weirdo for $5. Do you guys hear about this list of scary far right media? One of the books was Leviathan. They're on to us, boys. Yeah, I don't know if you guys have seen the couple lists of possible far right books. I think it's things like Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan and John Locke's treatise.
Whoa, have you read Loki?
I thought they were talking about Sam Francis Leviathan.
No. I could at least in some ways understand that, though. The Leviathan and its enemies is in no way not really far right, but yeah.
I love how you have Francis Parker Yockey Imperium right next to John Locke's tree, or Tocqueville is on America, right next to Imperium. That's amazing.
That is pretty wild. Creeper Weirdo again here for $5. Is it like Christian nationalism where we hack at an idea we don't fully understand how to implement or what it means? I think that it's very true that a lot of people grasp onto this language without fully understanding, as I think Gio did a really good job of kind of succinctly putting that together, where they understand the technical academic definition, but they don't understand its usage in kind of real conversation, and then they conflate it with other terms, and you end up in a situation where conservatives or opponents of progressivism are attacking strawmen they've constructed out of academic cloth in thinking that kind of will lead people to the truth there. Let's see. Quartz ZZ7 for 5 Canadian. Thank you very much. Sorry about Canada. How postmodernism is Marshall McLuhan. He hated the words. I don't know. I don't have the context for that one, Gio. I don't know if you can answer that at all.
Oh, well, actually, the context is I was recently on my good friend Tyler Hamilton Thamestar's show, EBL. It was me and the boys. We talked about McLuhan's book, Understanding Media. So you can find that on Thamestar's channel. That came out yesterday. No, McLuhan, he definitely was a modern thinker. He said that postmodernity is just another label. In the beginning of Understanding Media, he says it doesn't really grasp what he was trying to get at. But he does. I feel like reading McLuhan, you could very easily understand the foundation of the way in which the development of media and sort of the post-Gutenberg galaxy world culminated into a postmodern condition. But he himself is not a postmodernist. He thoroughly was in a sort of modernist tradition because he viewed. He wasn't a Black Mirror skeptic. He wasn't a Ellul. He wasn't certainly wasn't Uncle Ted or Linkola. He wasn't anti-technology. He very much had the modernist disposition of having a sort of not a utopianism, but seeing a sort of futuristic potentiality within a fully telecommunication, tech media saturated world. And he said that's just the condition we live in, and there's possibilities of something great within it. As well, it can also, he would say as much as it can hinder the human spirit, it gives the human spirit unique possibility. That's very much a modernist thing. So I wouldn't consider him a postmodernist. No. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right, Matty Ice here again for $10. Thank you very much. I like the philosophy, but in many ways, democracy would be good enough. But in a society where the tremendous effort to manipulate public opinion, a real democracy, enemies would agree, but not reform. Yeah, I don't know if you can avoid that big if though there, right? Like that's kind of the problem, is that the cathedral assembles itself when power leaks in the way that democracy allows it to, especially in the modern age with all the different technology allowing communication, dissemination of narratives and networking. So I don't know that you can ever, you got to remember that democracy is itself not actually that long lasting of a political kind of form.
A few hundred years, not even.
I'm sorry?
Few hundred years, not even. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to go back and pretend like Athenian democracy is the same thing, but even then famously not exactly known for its longevity or its actual prosperity for the Athenians. Funny thing about most people who reference it. But yeah, I don't know that the illusion of democracy can really survive the postmodern world. After the current narrative of popular sovereignty breaks, I don't know that you get to put it back together in the same way. You'll still get power derived from the demand of the crowd, like that will be what shifts us into whatever moment we have post democratic moment we have. But I don't know that you're ever going to just return to the idea that you just have an organic democracy that spans an entire empire. I don't think people are going to necessarily invest in that in the way that they have with America.
What do you two think of? I know Scott Greer wrote about this. The idea that Caesar can come from the left. Do you feel like the blue Caesar? Do you think there will be a blue Caesar?
I haven't encountered that. I mean, purple Caesar I hear all the time, but blue
purple Caesar, whatever, blue purple Caesar. Yeah,
I would have to go Brutus if that was the situation. I'm not.
Well, if by blue Caesar you mean like Stalin, then sure. But then how blue is it really, right?
Right.
When your communism becomes fascism to stabilize it, is it communism anymore? I mean, you can get deep in the weeds.
I think he meant like out of like the current milieu of like American like progressive politics, that there could potentially like actually like the left has a very strong will to power. Like maybe not a true will to power. I mean, I was talking about this with ZHP, but they certainly have the conditions of like a populist progressive Stalin, like let's call it a bio-Stalinism, if you like, that could be something.
Bio-Stalinism, there's a paper. One of us
so somewhere someone is launching a Substack just to
take that, Spandrel.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm honestly, I am skeptical of this. The possibilities exist, but you have a lot of problems with this narrative. The first one being that Caesar is probably in some ways a consolidation of type 2 residues outside of the ruling class. That's a condition necessary for Caesarism, and your type 2s are very unlikely to coalesce around a blue leader. I don't think that's probably. I think we're far more likely to see long-term stagnation than we are to see and just descent into third worldism than we are to see a coalition of type 2s around a kind of blue leader. I'm skeptical of that.
The regime will get much more authoritarian, but it will be like a third world type of situation.
Sorry, Auron, what's that with type 2s? I might not be getting the.
Yeah, sorry. So so Pareto has the two. He has 7 residues, but the main two that we talk about for ruling elites are the lions and the foxes. The foxes are your type 1 residues, and your lions are the type 2. And so we're totally dominated by foxes right now. We're totally dominated by the crafty, the combinations.
That's funny because I was actually I didn't know the type 1, type 2 thing, but what I was going to interject is that we need to start breeding lions before there is a Caesar, because I am familiar with that kind of that part of Italian elite school theory.
Yeah, the
But
lion and the foxes are
even Trump, as much as I think a lot
He
of the
needed to be
credit-
more of a fox than a lion. I hate to say it, but
or was he more of a, or was the issue that ultimately he is a fox, he just plays a really good lion on television.
That's exactly
and when
it.
and when the
Whoa.
moment arose in which
Yeah.
he needed to truly roar or bare his fangs, it became clear that he was a fox.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of truth to that. He was a fox making lion type noises, and people are so desperate for that kind of leadership that even the hint of it was enough for a lot of boomers to just like swear utter allegiance, just to see a hint of it, which shows you that there's a serious appetite for it. But I think that is the case with Trump.
Yeah, Trump was never a Caesar; he was a Crassus. For those that know your, Roman.
yeah, some people say that.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's true.
All right, let's see. Jonathan Richardson here for $10. The tradition actually says, "For now we see through a glass darkly, and now I know in part," as well as many other statements that long ago collapsed under human narratives and pontifications. What do you think, Paul? Wrong about this?
Yeah, I think there is something about that faith is always initially seen through a glass darkly. That there always has to be that struggle of clarity of vision. I know last things, maybe you comment better on this one.
Well, I guess I'm attempting to see through the glass, and it maybe does describe my condition somewhat well. I don't, if I'm taking the comment in the spirit it's meant, I don't think that I don't anticipate that I'm somebody that has the kind of personality that's going to experience religious revelation. I do think that it will be kind of a matter of praxis more than any kind of piercing moments of clarity.
Yeah, I think that that passage is conveying the fact that we never truly know the truth. At some point, we'll be in a situation where we will, but while we're in this world, we're never going to completely understand, the truth of these things. But I think I think that's you maybe speaks to the postmodern idea of like we're not going to be able to completely live in this world of logic. We're not going to completely be able to define reality and quantify everything. And so we have to make our way through life without that, without that certainty. And that's where that faith comes back in kind of at the end of the postmodern tradition there. But let's see what else we have here. Making sure I don't miss anybody. Quirts ZZ7, thank you very much again. Is Kant postmodern with his critique of pure reason?
No,
Has anyone here had the misfortune of reading Kant in depth?
Oh yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I've read only bits of critique of pure. I've read more of the Prolegomena, but
okay.
Yeah, I mean, well, no, because you would say that Kant was very formative in that sort of like Enlightenment tradition of reason itself, and like sort of reason being something that the understanding needs, like it motivates the understanding to predicate like the noumena, to like try to find a sort of like noumenal distinction within things of like mere appearance. So yeah, Kant is very, I mean, would you consider him a modern thinker? Yeah, I mean, definitely he leads the way to modernism in some ways, but no, nobody would consider him a postmodernist. No.
Super Joe's Midlife Crisis. That's an excellent name for $10. Thank you very much. A foot in the door to deconstruct back to religion is to understand that a lot of scripture has a strong rational basis. Don't eat shellfish makes sense in an era without refrigeration, for example. Actually, I think that's the opposite. That's applying rational, the scientific rational explanations to what are fundamentally religious dictates. Now, don't get me wrong, that's probably part of what the Bible was doing there, but to follow the dictate because it's what God said And because that's what's important about the dictate, irregardless of the rationalization behind it, is really the key to the religious aspect of it. To try to attempt to attach it to a scientific or rational necessity is the most modern thing you can do with the biblical truth that's kind of revealed through the law.
Yeah.
Let's see here. James Richardson again for $10, or sorry, Johan Richardson here for $10. In architecture, postmodernism led to humility and receptivity. Modernists were the critical reformers. Good Robert Venturi and Tina Brown interview here, and there's a link there with the timestamp. Yeah, I'm not super familiar on architecture. I am myself an artistic heathen, though I know I should appreciate more. But I don't know, so I don't know much about the idea of postmodernism in architecture, but that is interesting to know and to check out there. Thank you.
Yeah, it led really towards again a form of eclecticism and stylization that they really like saw the flaws in like a lot of modernist architecture being like a total project that consumed whole cities. That was like a grand utopian, like Corbusier had a grand utopian like vision of it. Like a lot of people think brutalism is like postmodernism. No, brutalism is like thoroughly modernist architecture in that it was predicated on a total vision of what living space looked like. Even Gradius with like the new city style, like the glass everywhere. You know, it's funny. A lot of people like, because skyscrapers are so like homogenized and standardized and like really are a bunch of eyesores. Gradius, he thought that really like having whole cities of glass windows was a spiritual vision, that it could like create like almost like an Edenic sort of existence where we would live through this like crystalline city. He very much was a futurist, right? But unfortunately, the international style became like the style of like city bugman neoliberal business world neoliberalism, unfortunately. So yeah.
Maddie, I said again here for $5. Didn't mean to sound like I was disagreeing with your position. Don't worry, Maddie. If you did, that's fine. That's why we're here. It's okay.
Yeah.
feel free to disagree all you like. More than happy to hear from you. Gio is right about glowing Steinem getting paid by the patriarchy she was fighting. Many such cases. The real suckers are the ones not getting paid, right?
Yeah.
Didn't secure the bag like a fool. Let's see here.
Oh my God. Oh.
Let's see. Life of Brian here for $9.99. Pomo in practice is MacIntyre. The loss of a meta narrative results in incoherent and emotive manipulation. People eventually lose the expectation of consistency, the current thing, eternal, present. Yeah, that's exactly right. You lose the ability to have moral conversations. You don't even expect the consistency of more reality in a lot of ways. So yep, that's exactly right.
I'll say this puts me in mind of, I don't disagree with Gio. I don't consider McLuhan himself to be a postmodern thinker, but a great postmodern movie, one of my favorite movies, I want to do a video essay on it at some point, and that deals a lot with McLuhan, is Videodrome.
Oh yeah,
I think that
classic Cronenberg, James Woods.
Yeah, I think it's Cronenberg's best film, but that's a
classic Canadian indie kino. The South Toronto School of Filmmaking that Cronenberg. Yeah, man. Oh, so much you could say about Videodrome.
Yeah, but the loss of, I would say, I'll say one thing about it.
The media becomes reality eventually. Yeah.
It's the loss of meta narrative. That's what the theme of Videodrome is about.
Yeah.
Enlightened Despot here for $5 Canadian. Sounds like you guys might need one over in Canada. I'm just going to keep making Canada the state of Canada jokes. Sorry. no offense to our Leafs on stream
here.
So I mean, we're right behind you, so don't worry. Sounds like you're saying there needs to be a rediscovery of metaphysics. Most people haven't had a metaphysical thought. Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a huge part of what we're talking about as well.
True.
All right, so I think that's everything, guys. Before we get out of here, last things. Where can people find your work? Do you have anything exciting people should be looking for? What's going on?
I was gonna publish a new video essay this week on my channel, but then Academic Agent announced a video essay contest that happens to be about mythology, and my video is on mythology, and so I'm planning to submit that to his contest. And I'm doing the Babe Ruth right now, guys. I'm pointing to the rafters, and I'm saying I'm going to hit it out of the park. I think I'm going to win this video essay contest, in which case my video will be, I believe, part of the prize is it will be on Academic Agent's channel. And I'm trying to I'll get my foot in the door to make him come on and do a live stream on mine as well. But
I want like a promo, like where you walk in and, like, I'm going to crush you all. I want to see a...
Yeah, he needs the worked shoot promo,
Exactly.
the pipe bomb where he like exposes the sector, the YouTube reactionary, the scene. You like have the work shoot where you like Paul Heyman in 2001 when he came to WWE and he had that pipe bomb where he like talks about how Vince McMahon destroyed the territories. That was great, by the way. I think that was way better than the Cuckman Phil. Oh, sorry, CM Punk promo. So.
Gio hitting us with lots of wrestling deep lore. I understood about 1/8 of what he just said there.
That would butter up Academic Agent. I should.
It would. That's exactly the way to go. Stack your.
Academic Agent would know about that reference, but
Well, Gio, what about you? Where should people find your stuff? Anything exciting that you're going to be putting out?
Exciting week. You can find me on Twitter, obviously, Jan Gio. I'm almost at 30K, but of course, Jenna Productions is my YouTube channel. My Telegram channel, my Patreon, patreon.com/Gender Productions. Also, Gio's Content Corner at Substack. If you don't want to pay me on Patreon, to get access to every content-minded episode, all of the backlog is also now on Substack. I really love Substack. I love how you can get both the free version and the paywall of each podcast. Now, I will have a writing coming out later in the week. I want to get back to my series on the E-Right. But this week, exciting stuff I have on Content Minded. The writer, Apuke Krumenin, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. Apuke Krumenin, sorry. He's a very popular, he's semi-popular Substack writer, good friend of mine, also a fellow Leaf. And we talk about Elul and Carl Schmidt. So it's going to be great. And also this Thursday, it's not Content Minded, that's Wednesday. This Thursday, the Digital Archipelago with me and Prudentialist is on my channel, Janet Productions, and we have a special guest for a special topic, although the topic's kind of terrible. My good friend Kino Corner, speaking of YouTube video essayists, Kino Corner is joining me and Prudentialist, and get this, we're going to review Daily Wire films.
Boy.
Wow.
Oh, it's going to be brutal. Me, Prudentialist, Kino Corner on my channel, Janet Productions. I'm almost at 5K. Please get me to 5K.
I demand that all three of you get in front of the screen, and there's like a Gio with a fez doing the mystery science thing, pointing at the the screen as you go through the movies. That's what I want the most.
Oh my god, yeah. We're gonna cover the one with the girl boss on the frontier, the one with Vincent Gallo, and especially the school you-know-what film, the School Fun Post. Oh my god. Actually, I have a lot to say about that film. So please, this Thursday on my channel, 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time. It's gonna be me, Prudentialist and Kino Corner. It's the title of the title of the stream is called Little Ben Goes to the Movies. So there you go. Man, Daily Wire. Talking about postmodern tradition, Daily Wire has such an opportunity to create the most mind-bogglingly right-wing reactionary films. But what do? Well, you'll find out.
There's only one place to go, and that's heading to Gio's stream there. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, make sure you check out both of these guys' work. They do great work. And if, of course, you are here for the first time, go ahead and subscribe. If you have not done so, you can go ahead and check out this show as a podcast. Go to any of your major podcast platforms and subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show. If you do, make sure to leave that rating and that review. It really helps out with the algorithm magic and everything. Thanks everybody for coming by. We had a lot of great questions. Always fantastic to have the dream team back. We'll definitely do it again soon. Thanks for watching, everyone. And as always, I will talk to you next time.